February 18th, 1982. A parking garage in Lower Manhattan. Anthony Mirra walks down to his car the way he has 1,000 times. He is 52 years old. He has been a made man in the Bonanno family for most of his adult life, an earner with a reputation so severe that men who had known him for decades still measured their words around him. He is not being ambushed by strangers. The person waiting for him is family. Not family in the way that word gets used in these stories, actual blood. And within a few minutes, Anthony Mirra will be dead in his own car, killed by a relative who was given the job precisely because he was the one man Mirra would never think to watch. The story that survives about this period belongs to somebody else. A federal agent spent 6 years living inside the Bonanno family and came out with a book and then a film, and that version is the one everyone knows. Charming, tragic, a friendship that turned out to be a lie. Here is what that version has no room for. The agent did not get in on his own. Someone brought him. Someone sat him down at a table, told the room he was solid, and opened a door that had been closed to outsiders for 50 years. That someone was Anthony Mirra. And the moment the government held its press conference and told the world what it had done, Mirra was not a victim of the operation. He was the invoice. You have to understand what vouching actually meant in that world. It was not an introduction. It was a guarantee written against your own life. If the man you brought in turned out to be something other than what you said he was, the family did not accept that you had been fooled. Being fooled was the crime. The rule existed because it was the only thing standing between a secret organization and total penetration, and it had to be enforced without exception, or it meant nothing at all. So here is what you are about to hear. How a federal agent got inside the Bonanno family in the first place, and who actually opened that door. Why 2 different men were held responsible for the same mistake, and why only one of them is remembered. What the family did to make sure this particular killing carried a message. And why the contract went to the one person in New York who could get close enough, a young relative who would later sit in a federal courtroom and describe exactly what he did. You have to understand who Anthony Mirra was before the name Donnie Brasco meant anything. Mirra was not a Hollywood character. He was not a wise old mentor or a cartoon gangster. He was a Bonanno family soldier with a reputation that even other mobsters found unsettling. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a gaunt face and eyes that people remembered. He was a made man, a killer, a drug dealer, and an earner. In the Mafia, earning money covers a lot of sins. Mirra earned. He ran loan sharking operations, he moved narcotics when the bosses pretended not to notice, and he controlled a crew of associates who feared him. He was violent in a way that wasn't strategic, it was personal. Other mobsters used violence as a tool. Mirra used it as a language. He had a temper that could turn a conversation into a tragedy in seconds. People in the Bonanno family knew that being around Mirra meant walking on glass. He was paranoid, unpredictable, and dangerous, but he was also connected. He knew people. He could make introductions. And in 1977, when a young FBI agent named Joseph Pistone was looking for a way into the Mafia, the Bureau identified Mirra as the perfect door. Here is the part the movie left out. The FBI didn't just stumble into the Bonanno family. They studied the architecture. They knew that to penetrate the Mafia, they needed a sponsor, someone with enough status to vouch for a newcomer, but enough hunger to take a risk on a stranger. Anthony Mirra was that man. He was always looking for new earners, new associates who could expand his operations. He was arrogant enough to believe he could spot a cop. He was greedy enough to overlook the warning signs. The FBI's psychological profile of Mirra was precise. He was a predator who thought he was the smartest man in every room. That confidence, that arrogance would become the crack that broke the entire operation open. Pistone, as Donnie Brasco, was introduced to Mirra through an informant in 1977. The meeting took place at a social club in Manhattan. Pistone walked in with the right look, the right story, the right silences. He said he was a jewel thief from Florida, a guy who could move stolen goods, a guy who knew how to make money. Mirra studied him. The test wasn't a conversation. It was a feeling. Over weeks and months, Mirra watched Brasco. He sent him on small errands. He checked his story. He looked for the tells that only a career criminal would recognize. And Brasco passed every test. Not because he was a great actor, because he wasn't acting. He had become the role. His entire life was the operation. He had no other identity. That is what the movie couldn't fully capture. The psychological cost of erasing your own existence for years. The loneliness, the paranoia, the slow realization that the line between Joseph Pistone and Donnie Brasco was disappearing. Mirra trusted Brasco enough to bring him deeper. He introduced him to other members of the Bonanno family. He vouched for him. In the Mafia, a voucher is a bond. When a made man introduces an associate, he is putting his own life on the line. If the associate turns out to be an informant, a cop, or a problem, the man who vouched for him pays the price. That rule is absolute. It is the foundation of Mafia security. The family doesn't just punish the infiltrator, it punishes the man who opened the door. Mirra knew this. Every made man knows this. The risk is part of the power. The voucher says, "I trust this man so completely that I will die if I am wrong." In 1977, Anthony Mirra made that bet on Donnie Brasco. It was the worst bet of his life. Remember that detail. It becomes the death sentence years later. The operation expanded. Brasco didn't just stay with Mirra. He moved through the Bonanno family like a virus that the body didn't detect. He was introduced to Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero, the man Al Pacino would later immortalize. Lefty was a soldier in the Bonanno family, a man who had spent his life in the life, a man with no savings, no exit strategy, and no future. He was the perfect mentor for an undercover agent. Lefty was broke, desperate, and hungry for respect. He took Brasco under his wing. He taught him the rules. He explained the codes. He treated him like a son, and Brasco listened, recorded, and documented everything. The relationship between Lefty and Brasco became the emotional core of the movie, and for good reason. It was real. Pistone later said that he genuinely cared about Lefty, that the line between agent and friend blurred in ways that haunted him for years. But here is what the movie didn't show. Lefty wasn't the one who brought Brasco in. Mirra was. Lefty inherited the relationship. Mirra created it. And when the operation finally ended, the Mafia would remember who opened the door first. For years, the FBI gathered evidence. Pistone recorded hundreds of hours of conversations. He documented murders, extortion schemes, drug deals, loan sharking operations, and the internal politics of the Bonanno family. He mapped the entire structure. He identified the bosses, the captains, the soldiers, the associates. He learned how the money moved, how the violence was ordered, how the silence was enforced. The operation was the most successful mafia infiltration in FBI history. But success, in an undercover operation, doesn't mean a quiet ending. It means exposure, and exposure means bodies. In 1981, the FBI made the decision to end Operation Donnie Brasco. The evidence was overwhelming. The indictments were coming, and Joseph Pistone, the agent who had vanished for 6 years, had to come back to the surface. The Mafia learned the truth in the most humiliating way possible. One of their own, a man they had trusted, a man they had embraced, was a federal agent. The psychological impact was devastating. The Mafia's entire security system was based on trust, on vouching, on the idea that no outsider could penetrate the family. Donnie Brasco destroyed that illusion. And the Bonanno family, already weakened by internal wars and power struggles, was shattered. The bosses were arrested, the soldiers were indicted, the associates ran for cover, and the man who had started it all, Anthony Mirra, became a target. The Mafia doesn't just get angry at betrayal. It performs surgery. The infection has to be removed. The man who vouched for the agent has to be eliminated. Not because of what he knew, but because of what he represented. Mirra was the point of failure. He was the living proof that the family's security had been breached. As long as he was alive, the bosses looked weak. And in the Mafia, looking weak is more dangerous than being dead. The decision was made. Anthony Mirra had to go. But the Mafia didn't just want him dead. They wanted him dead in a way that sent a message. And the man chosen to deliver that message was his own nephew. Joseph D'Amico was not a stranger to the life. He was Mirra's nephew, a young man who had grown up around the Bonanno family, a man who understood the rules. He was not a made man. He was an associate, a guy on the fringes, someone who did what he was told, but he was family, blood. And in the Mafia's calculus, that made the killing more powerful. If a man's own nephew would kill him, then the betrayal was complete. The family was purging itself. The message was not just to the dead man, It was to everyone still breathing. No one is safe. No bond is sacred. The organization survives. The individual does not. The setup was arranged through Mirra's own crew. D'Amico later testified that he was approached by Bonanno family members who made it clear what had to happen. Mirra was a dead man walking. The only question was, who would pull the trigger? D'Amico agreed to do it. The reasons he later gave were complicated: fear, survival, the understanding that if he refused, he would be next. In the Mafia, a refusal is a confession. If you won't kill for the family, you are against the family. D'Amico was young, ambitious, and trapped. He made the choice that countless men before him had made. He chose to survive. On February 18, 1982, D'Amico met his uncle in a social club. They talked. They drove to the parking garage at 155 Bank Street. Mirra had no idea what was coming. He trusted his nephew. That trust, like the trust he had placed in Donnie Brasco, was a death sentence. In the parking garage, D'Amico got into the passenger seat of Mirra's car. He pulled out a gun. He shot his uncle multiple times. Anthony Mirra, the man who had introduced the undercover agent, the man who had brought down the Bonanno family, died in the front seat of his own car, killed by his own blood. The body was discovered. The news spread through the Mafia. The message was received. The Bonanno family was cleaning house. Other men connected to the Brasco operation were also marked. Lefty Ruggiero was arrested and later died of cancer while awaiting trial. Dominic "Sonny Black" Napolitano, the captain who had also vouched for Brasco, was summoned to a meeting. He knew what was coming. He left his jewelry at home, just like in the movie. He said goodbye to his girlfriend. He walked into a basement and was shot to death. His body was buried, but later dug up by investigators. The Bonanno family was erasing its mistakes, but the mistake that mattered most, the original sin, was Mirra, and Mirra was already gone. The aftermath was not clean. The Donnie Brasco operation led to over 200 indictments. The Bonanno family was decimated. Bosses went to prison. The family's power structure collapsed. Joseph Pistone entered the witness protection program and lived for years under a new identity, unable to see his family, unable to reclaim his old life. The cost of the operation was not just measured in arrests. It was measured in lives destroyed on both sides. The Mafia killed to protect its secrets. The FBI asked its agents to sacrifice their identities, their families, their sanity. The line between good and evil was never as clear as the movie suggested. Joseph D'Amico's story didn't end in the parking garage. He continued in the life for years, but the weight of what he had done and the pressure of law enforcement eventually caught up with him. He was arrested on various charges. Facing decades in prison, he made the same calculation that so many mobsters have made. He cooperated. He became a government witness. He testified about the murder of his uncle, about the Bonanno family's operations, about the orders that came down from the bosses. The nephew who killed his uncle became the witness who helped bury what was left of the family. The cycle of betrayal was complete. Mirra vouched for Brasco and died. D'Amico killed Mirra and then cooperated. The machine consumed everyone who touched it. The public version of the Donnie Brasco story ends with Lefty's tragic walk. The real version ends with a parking garage in Lower Manhattan. The movie needed a sympathetic figure, a man the audience could mourn. Lefty Ruggiero became that figure. He was broke, loyal, doomed. Audiences cried for him. But the real story didn't have a hero. It had a system that turned men into predators, predators into targets, and targets into memories. Anthony Mirra was not sympathetic. He was a killer, a drug dealer, a man who had ruined countless lives. But his death revealed something essential about the Mafia. The organization does not forgive. It does not forget. It does not care about blood. It cares about survival. And when survival requires a sacrifice, even family becomes expendable. The neighborhood where Mirra operated, Little Italy, and the social clubs of Manhattan has changed. The old cafes are gone. The social clubs are tourist attractions. The men who once ruled those blocks are dead, in prison, or in witness protection. The Mafia still exists, but the world that created Anthony Mirra doesn't exist anymore. The silence that protected the organization has been broken by informants, by surveillance, by the slow erosion of the code that once seemed unbreakable. The Donnie Brasco operation was not just an investigation. It was a preview of the Mafia's future, a future where trust is impossible, where every introduction could be a federal agent, and where the price of a mistake is always death.